Howdy everybody, Dr. Andy Woods here. This is Pastor's Point of View number 347. This is being released on March the 28th, 2025. We have a Pastor's Point of View prophecy update for you. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. And as you look at your preview slide there, here are the categories that we're going to try to cover in this particular session. The work of the restrainer, we'll talk more about that. Some insights concerning the coming temple. And then I want to bring you up to speed on the GOG-MAGOG alignment, including some things that are happening here in the United States related to the Islamization of key cities here in the United States of America. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and start with the work of the restrainer. And as a jumping off point, let's look at 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 6 and 7, where Paul says, "And you know what restrains him, so that now in his time he will be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way." In other words, before the man of lawlessness comes, there's something that's going to restrain his program right up till the eve of the point of the rapture. We see the work of the restrainer also described in Romans 13, verses 3 through 5. Where Paul says government can function as a restraint in evil. It says, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good, but if you do what is evil, be afraid. For it does not bear the sword for nothing. It is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil." So the truth of the matter is, in the grace of God and in the providence of God, before the end time scenario unfolds, the scripture clearly reveals God uses different mechanisms to hold back the floodwaters, so to speak, the tide of evil. And I don't believe that the Trump administration is a perfect administration, but they are certainly doing an awful lot to erase a lot of the problems that were coming to us via the Biden regime that were pushing us very aggressively into the New World Order. And I want to bring some of those things that the Trump administration has done and is doing to your attention. And I think it's relevant in a prophecy update because it's part of, as far as I can tell, the work of the restraint of evil. So notice this particular article from Israel National News. It says the Trump administration tells United Nations agencies to disclose all anti-U.S. ties. I mean, this is a wonderful thing. Notice what the article says. It says the Trump administration is demanding that United Nations affiliated humanitarian that receive American funding organizations disclose any connections to anti-American organizations or ideologies such as communism, the New York Post has reported. The agencies, which include the UN Refugee Agency and UNICEF, received questionnaires requiring them to disclose these connections. One of the questions asks the organization to confirm that it does not work with entities associated with communist, socialist, or totalitarian parties, or any party that espouses anti-American beliefs. So here's Trump with a wonderful executive order making an anti-New World Order declaration that if you get U.S. money and you're connected to the United Nations and you're involved in anti-Western, anti-American ideologies, then we need a full disclosure of that. That's the work, I believe, of the restrainer. Here's something else that the Trump administration is doing to restrain evil. Notice this article from the New York Post. By the way, the previous article is a March 14th article. This one is a March 7th, 2025 article. And it says the Trump administration yanks $400 million in grants, contracts from Columbia University over anti-Semitism on campus. Notice what this particular article says. It says the Trump administration pulled back roughly $400 million in grants and contracts from Columbia University on Friday, citing the Ivy League school's noncompliance with anti-discrimination laws. Since October the 7th, Jewish students have faced relentless violence, intimidation, and anti-Semitic harassment on their campuses, only to be ignored by those who are supposed to protect them. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said in a statement, universities must comply with all anti-discrimination laws if they're going to receive funding. Far too long, Columbia has abandoned the obligation to Jewish students studying on campus. Today, we demonstrate to Columbia and other universities that we will not tolerate their appalling inaction any longer. I mean, could you imagine going to school, a top-notch school, an Ivy League school, and you're afraid your life is threatened just because you're a Jewish student? I mean, that to me is just insanity. I know Columbia is known for being very, very liberal. I've interacted with some people in my law school years that were graduates of Columbia, some of the most leftist, liberal, in-your-face people, I can think of, graduates of that institution. Well, now the institution has plummeted into just outright anti-Semitism, and yet they're still receiving $400 million from the government. I mean, the last time I checked, or the last time I heard, Columbia has an endowment that's in well north of the $1 billion range. So why does a school with, I think I heard, close to $4 billion, that level of an endowment, why are they receiving any funds? Why do they need any funds from the United States government? So we're fortunate to have a president that says, you know what, we're going to clip your funds as long as you're exercising anti-Semitic behavior, and as long as Jewish students on campus are afraid for their lives, essentially is what is being said here. What you're doing is completely and totally outrageous by not policing your campus. So is this a negative thing that the Trump administration is doing? No, it's a very positive thing. It's a very pro-Israel thing. And it's just another example how we're living in a time period where there's a reprieve in many ways, where God is using the Trump administration to restrain evil. Here's another one. Notice this particular screenshot. This one from, it's just dubbed the White House. And it says here, presidential actions, Trump signs an executive order to empower parents and states and close the Department of Education. I can't tell you what a big deal this is. Let's read a little bit about it from this article from the AP. This particular article is dated March the 20th, 2025. It's entitled, Trump Plans to Eliminate the Department of Education. And notice what this particular article says. It says, President Donald Trump signed an executive order Thursday aiming to eliminate the United States Education Department. Trump has derided the department as wasteful and, look at this, polluted by liberal ideology. And of course, he's absolutely right about that. Here we've poured countless dollars into this department, and what do we have to show for it? Nothing. Our students at one time were very high in terms of international rankings. And with the coming of the Department of Education under then President Jimmy Carter, despite all of the, centralizing of education, federalizing education, pumping millions, if not billions of dollars into public education, what do we have to show for it? Virtually nothing. Our students now graduating from our institutions are now at the bottom. And so Trump is basically saying here, let's turn education back over to the individual state governments where it belongs. Just to show you how incompetent our public educational system has become, notice this particular article from WSAZ.com, again, a recent article, February the 28th, 2025. It's entitled, "A Former High School Honor Student." And we're going to see in a minute, this person is not just an honor student. This person is someone who has received, I believe, a college scholarship. Former high school honor student who says she can't read sues the district where she graduated. So we have a top-notch student, an honor student, en route to college. There's just one thing missing. She can't read. She's gone through K through 12 I believe, in the state of Connecticut. Think of all of the federalizing of education. Think of all of the federal money pumped into federal education. And yet the educational system has failed her where she's not even able to read, and now she's suing the school district from which she graduated from. Let's read a little bit from this particular article. It says, a Connecticut college student is suing the Hartford Board of Education and the city of Hartford for negligence, which is a legal term for carelessness. This 19-year-old Alicia Ortiz says she graduated from high school with honors and earned a college scholarship, but she can't read. And I misspoke a little earlier. I underestimated the situation. Not only can she not read, she can't write. I mean, aren't those two things you need to make it through college? Aren't those two things that any graduate should be able to do? The article quotes the sad series of circumstances. Quoting her, they would either tell me to stay in the corner or sleep or just draw pictures with flowers on them, Ortiz said about her earlier education. When she was in high school, Ortiz relied on it's called speech-to-text programs and other apps to read or write essays. And this is just a horrific article that, documents her sad state of affairs. Keep these kind of stories in mind when you hear the left, screaming and yelling about, oh no, Trump is going to close down the Department of Education. Education is going to fall apart. Well, the truth of the matter is what we've been doing since Jimmy Carter is falling apart already. Trump is trying to rescue it by defederalizing it and sending the whole issue back to the states. Just to show you how far we plummeted, this there on your screen is an 8th grade examination in a particular county given in 1912. And there's questions there about reading, arithmetic, grammar, geography, physiology, civil government, and history. This is long before the Department of Education. This is long before we started pouring all of this money into education. And I guarantee as you read this particular examination, given to 8th graders, by the way, in 1912, you'd be hard-pressed to answer a single question on this exam. The writing is very small, so I can't read all of the questions. But here's one question from geography. Define longitude and latitude. Here's one question from history. Who first discovered the following places? Florida, the Pacific Ocean, the Mississippi River, or the St. Lawrence River? I mean, there's complicated questions about arithmetic, grammar, civil government. And I love looking at these kinds of things because it shows us what we once were educationally long before the Department of Education came into existence. Education was doing just fine under state control. In fact, it was excelling, I should say. And what federalizing education has done essentially has destroyed education in this country. And now Trump is saying it's time to close the Department of Education and send education back to the state governments where it once flourished. It's beyond, though, incompetence. I want to draw your attention to this book by Paul Vitz. I think he wrote this in the mid-1980s. The title of it is Censorship: Evidence of Bias in Our Children's Textbooks. And basically what it talks about is how once education became centralized and federalized under the Department of Education, under then President Jimmy Carter, all of the Judeo-Christian references to our country began to disappear from our children's textbooks. You know, the tremendous Judeo-Christian heritage that this country has started to get censored once education became federalized. And now people are graduating from the school system thinking that our founding fathers were Masons or deists. Not the slightest thought that they could have been Christians, which they were. And if all of them weren't born again, they at least had tremendous respect for Christianity. And you can demonstrate this very easily from their writings. It's not hard to do. Entire ministries are set up, by the way, to help us with this. Well, all of these references have disappeared from public school textbooks, and you can thank the Department of Education for that. That's what happens when education moved under federal control. And now Trump wants to come in. He signed an executive order phasing out the Department of Education, and let's return it to the states where it's traditionally been, where it once flourished, and where it belongs. Now, these are not the movements that an antichrist will make. These are movements that a patriot makes that are anti-New World Order. And so that's just why I'm bringing these things to your attention as the obvious restraint or slowdown of evil, delaying the decay taking place in our world right now since Donald Trump was inaugurated, first elected back in November and then inaugurated January 20th. But the unelected federal judiciary is doing everything within its power to stop these positive developments. Notice this particular screenshot from X. It says, breaking. Federal Judge Lee Rosenthal just issued an order blocking Texas A&M University from canceling a drag show on campus because, according to her, Trump's executive order cannot override First Amendment protections. Nothing in Draggyland performance offends the executive order, the board cites. No male performer in the drag show is stating an intent to become a woman, nor does the board point to evidence in the record establishing that the president's executive order on biological truth specifically refers or applies to drag shows. The court grants the motion for a preliminary injunction. The board is enjoined from enforcing the ban. The Draggyland performance, scheduled for March the 27th, 2025, in the Rudder Theater, may proceed as originally scheduled. And then this person that posted this language from this order from this lower court judge. Says these judges are disgusting. What's going on? Trump says, you know what, we're not going to fund all of this transsexual LGBTQ plus stuff anymore. And if you're in a university that's funding it and promoting it, then no more money for you. Well, here comes some low-level judge saying, you know what, Mr. President, you are going to shell out the money when it's well within your powers in the executive branch to control where the money goes. So here is a judge forcing the President of the United States to spend money on this whole transsexual issue. And she's claiming that if money is taken away, that it somehow violates the First Amendment. People have a First Amendment freedom to do whatever they want, but they don't have freedom for the government to pay for it. And that's all the Trump administration is doing here. And here this judge is trying to use their position to reverse what Trump is doing by way of responsible use of his executive powers. This is the type of spiritual warfare that we are involved in. In fact, I have a quote here from Justice Alito on the Supreme Court. There was a recent 5-4 decision involving this kind of an issue, a lower court judge trying to put handcuffs on what the Trump administration is doing regarding reasonable use of executive power. And unfortunately, Alito was in the minority on this, and so he ended up writing this particular dissent. He said, quote, "Does a single district court judge who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion of taxpayer funding?" The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court, the United States Supreme Court, in other words, apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. So this is the kind of thing that's happening. This is the kind of thing that's transpiring regularly. You'll notice this particular picture here of Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer recently on a PBS interview, and I thought I had the quote in front of me, but it looks like I do not. But at anyway, the specific quote I'll just have to kind of paraphrase. He admitted on this particular PBS interview that, you know what, we've already appointed 235, and he used this language, progressive justices, progressive jurists to stop Trump. And so what you see happening is the unelected, oligarchical, out of control, very liberal federal judiciary is trying to put handcuffs on Trump as he is trying to slow down the progress of evil in our country and our world. And it's abominable what these judges are doing. And a lot of these judges are making decisions when they have a basic conflict of interest and should have recused themselves from making such decisions. Notice this particular screenshot. It's entitled Lawfare. And it says this: the Obama judge blocking Trump's deportation of illegal criminal gang members has a daughter whose NGO provides legal services to illegals, including this TDA and MS-13 terrorist group that Donald Trump has removed from our country. It says, including this group, members and is funded by government grants indirectly via USAID. And the article says this: daughter of Obama appointed judge blocking Trump's deportations, works for an NGO defending TDA and MS-13 members. Judge James Boasberg, I think is how you pronounce that, his daughter, Catherine Boasberg, works for Partners for Justice, a pro-illegal immigration NGO that receives over half of its funding from USAID and other government grants. The organization provides legal advice and representation to criminal illegal aliens. And this says hat tip Laura Loomer for uncovering this piece of information. So what's going on here? One of the things Trump has done is he's taken people that are basically part of a terrorist group and sent them back to their own country. You're not going to commit your acts of mayhem or terrorism. And suddenly some lower court judge turns around and says the Trump administration can't do that, turn the plane around and get these terrorists back within the borders of the United States. It's a lower court judge. This is who Alito sounded off against when he said, I'm stunned that the Supreme Court, is backing this type of apparatus and backing this type of thing. And here's this judge making this totally unconstitutional ruling when his own daughter has a conflict of interest and is working for groups that support these terrorists. I mean, why didn't this judge have the integrity to recuse himself? So not only is his ruling unconstitutional, but he shouldn't even been making the ruling to begin with, because he's violating the basic canons of judicial responsibility that you agree to submit to as a judge, where you can't make decisions when you have a blatant conflict of interest. In other words, the decision is going to have some kind of negative or positive effect on your own family members. This is the type of moral, political, legal, and judicial corruption that we are descending to in this country. Here is another screenshot, and it says, wife of Obama judge blocking Trump deportations, receive funding from USAID. Elizabeth Manson, Judge Boasberg's wife. I mean, didn't we just get finished talking about his daughter? Well, now let's talk about his wife. Is a prolific Democrat donor and founder of an abortion NGO, a non-government organization, in other words, called Meadow Reproductive Health and Wellness. Her NGO received indirect grants from USAID and contributions from Soros-related NGOs through a feeder fund. So not only is this guy, as a very lower court judge with no constitutional basis whatsoever, trying to put handcuffs on the legitimate activities of the executive branch, but he's doing so when he's got blatant conflict of interest in his own family, where these rulings are going to have a positive effect on his own family members. Corruption, I would say, at the highest level. And so that leads to this MSN article. This one dated March the 19th, 2025. It says, thanks to a rep, we'll give you his name in a second, the judge overruling Trump is about to get a disgraceful status than less than 1% of federal judges have ever had. And what it's talking about is articles of impeachment, rightfully so, have been filed against this particular jurist. Representative Brandon Gill, a Republican from Texas, introduced articles of impeachment against United States District Judge. Now, the district court is the lowest federal court. And that's what's happening with these rulings that we have been seeing. The lowest federal court is putting handcuffs on the executive branch of government by making these very broad-based rulings that go way outside their jurisdiction. Representative Brandon Gill, a Republican from Texas, introduced articles of impeachment against United States District Judge James Boasberg, who tried to stop the Trump administration from deporting Tren de Agua gang members over the weekend. Boasberg tried to block the move, even verbally ordering the administration to turn the plane around in midair. Can you imagine a district court judge doing this? The district court judge, lowest level judge, unelected himself but appointed, doing this to the man that won the popular vote in November and 312 electoral votes. I mean, this is not an attack against President Trump alone. This is an attack against everyone in this country, the majority of whom, whether it's the popular vote or the electoral vote, keep in mind Trump won every swing state. This is an attack against all the people that believe in the policies of Donald Trump. This is a swipe not at him. This is a swipe at you, Mr. and Mrs. America. Gill therefore presented his articles of impeachment to the House, accusing Boasberg of high crimes and misdemeanors in the form of pursuing political gain while blocking Trump's constitutional prerogatives and enforcement of the rule of law. The article says there have only been 15 federal judges impeached throughout the history of the country, and only 8 have been convicted of their crimes, according to a webpage for the United States courts. Though he is unlikely to be removed from office, even successfully impeaching Boasberg would put him among less than 1% of federal judges in our nation's history who have had that not so illustrious distinction. So should this man be impeached? Of course he should. But the truth of the matter is, the article points out, it's hard to do that. You've got to get a conviction in the House by a simple majority, and then the issue goes over to the Senate, and 2/3, a supermajority of senators, have to vote for removal, which is a very high standard to meet. I'm glad these articles of impeachment have been filed, but in my opinion, it's kind of too little, too late. There's other things that can be done. So that's why I was very heartened to see this particular headline from the Geller Report, March 12th, 2025. It says, Trump signs an executive order stating that he will ignore all lower court rulings until SCOTUS rules on the constitutionality of activist judges attempting to usurp executive power. Here is another screenshot communicating the same thing. This one dated March the 12th, 2025. It says, Trump signs the executive order that he will ignore all lower court rulings until SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, rules on the constitutionality of activist judges attempting to usurp executive order. And I say to this regarding President Trump, right on. Thumbs up. First of all, these district courts and circuit courts are not even mentioned in the United States Constitution. They are created by Congress. Congress, and we covered this, I think, on Pastor's Point of View number 345, through a simple majority vote, can either remove these low-level courts or limit their jurisdiction. And in fact, Speaker Johnson, I think we have the quote on that. Maybe we can put that up. Speaker Johnson has said recently that, this was within the last couple of days, as of the time of this recording, we have the ability to eliminate, to get rid of an entire district court. And that's the kind of thing that we need to start see happening. Impeachment, good step, but it's a little too late. We need to start exploring other ways of controlling these out-of-control judges, or else we're really not living in a free country. I mean, we can vote and vote and vote, and here's some district court judge putting handcuffs on the executive branch with all kinds of conflicts of interest as he's doing so. He hasn't been elected by anyone. He has been appointed. And he is doing so in a judicial court that doesn't even exist in the United States Constitution and only exists by the good graces of Congress. So something more radical needs to happen, or else our country is just going to get pulled right down the drain and move into some sort of oligarchical, judicial dictatorship. And so I support the President of the United States as he's now going to willfully ignore these rogue lower court federal judges. Now people say, well, that's terrible. How can you support something like that? The left is just screaming bloody murder about this executive order and how quickly they forget what Biden did. Notice this particular screenshot here. The decision was made long ago. The precedent was set. Judges don't matter. And it says this: the Supreme Court tried to block me, Biden speaking, from relieving student debt, but they didn't stop me. I've relieved student debt for over 5 million Americans, and I'm going to keep going. So Biden came up with this idea that we're going to cancel student debts. The United States Supreme Court, not a district court, which is the lowest federal court, not a circuit court, which is the appellate level at the federal level, but SCOTUS itself said, you can't do that, Mr. President. You can't unilaterally wave a magic wand and relieve student debt. And what does Biden say? I'm going to do it anyway. That's the prior administration. And keep that in mind when you hear all these complaints about Trump ignoring judicial rulings. Biden did it for the Supreme Court. Trump is just doing it for the district courts, and he's not doing it forever. He's doing it until SCOTUS finally weighs in, confirming, affirming, or disaffirming, the constitutionality of what these rogue district court judges are doing. So this is the kind of scenario that we find ourselves in the United States of America. I'm grateful that we have someone like President Trump in office, because I see largely many of the things that he is doing are good for the United States, good for America. And I think they are part of the prophetic scenario, which is holding back the flood of evil prior to God's anointed time, appointed time, when the end time scenario can be fulfilled. See, this is an angle that we're bringing out in this prophecy update that almost all of the other ministries that do prophecy updates won't tell you about. They want everything to be evil, everything to be bad. They want to sort of act like we're in the tribulation period now. But part of studying Bible prophecy is understanding what God is doing through the restraint of evil up until the eve of the rapture. That's part of the prophetic jigsaw puzzle as well. And so that's why I bring many of these things to your attention in a prophecy update. Let's go to our next bullet point, and it has to do with the coming temple. We know from Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, we can put that scripture up, that the Antichrist will desecrate the temple midway through the tribulation period. It says, and he, Antichrist, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. We've captured that verse in the form of a graphic. It tells you what the Antichrist is going to do midway through the tribulation period. He's going to desecrate the third functioning rebuilt Jewish temple, something that is impossible without the rebuilding of temple number 3. on the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem. And we're now moving into a time period where more and more people are talking about the rebuilding of temple number 3. Here's our list of Israel's 4 temples in her history. 2 past, 2 future. And I'm focused there on temple number 3. You can see in parenthesis the various scriptures that indicate temple number 3 must be rebuilt. And the fact that we're moving in that direction and more people are talking about this shows us that the 7-year tribulation period is coming very fast. And if the 7-year tribulation period is coming fast, and if the rapture of the church precedes the 7-year tribulation period, then the rapture of the church is coming even faster. Some have put it this way: when the discussion of the world is on Israel, you're dealing with God's hour hand. When the discussion of the world gets more focused on Jerusalem, you're dealing with God's minute hand. And when the discussion of the world leaves those subjects and focuses on the Temple Mount, which is where we are now, then you're dealing with God's second hand. So it's in that spirit that I bring this particular article to your attention from Israel 365 News, March 7th, 2025. It says an NGO works to save temple beams being destroyed by the Palestinian WAF. And it says this, let's see if I'm pronouncing this right, Bayadino, an NGO, non-government organization working to establish rights on the Temple Mount, has launched a campaign to save timbers from the first and second temples that are being neglected and exposed to the elements and rotting away. The only obstacle to saving these precious artifacts is the Muslim WAF, which insists that temples never existed and that Israel therefore has no right to bring them in out of the rain. The article talks about how they've conducted carbon-14 tests on these timbers. One Cyrus beam was determined to be 2,600 years old, harvested around 630 BC and around 50 years before the destruction of the first temple. This was approximately 1,400 years before the Aqsa Mosque was built, and some 1,200 years before Muhammad lived. Shockingly, one of the oak beams was determined to be 2,860 years old. That meant that the tree had been cut down around 880 BC, early in the first time period. So suddenly they're discovering more and more artifacts from the original temples. The Solomonic temple, destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. The temple that was built by the returnees from the exile, destroyed by Titus of Rome. And the Jewish nation is taking a great interest in these temples. Why are they taking a great interest in these timbers, I should say? Well, because they have ambitions to rebuild temple number 3. And Islam, of course, doesn't like this progress that Israel is making here, because to them, Jerusalem is their holy site. It's a place where Muhammad allegedly ascended back to Allah on a steed named Barak. So this temple tension is continuing in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and the reason it's become center stage in our time period is because God said that in the end times, temple number 3 is going to be rebuilt. And so articles like this show us the initial rumblings, if you will, of the soon coming advent of temple number 3. Notice this particular screenshot. This one comes from the Temple Institute. You can go right on to their social media and see these things that they post regularly. I mean, this is just one example. This is a recent post of theirs. This is a group within Israel that wants to rebuild temple number 3. And this particular one is talking about the ordinance of the red heifer. The red heifer, of course, are those animals, I think somewhere between 6 to 8 of them, taken from Rockwall, Texas, brought into Israel, exported from Rockwall, Texas, imported into Israel, and they're trying to see if these are what we would call pure red heifers, no stray hairs, to fulfill Numbers 19. Because the ashes of those red heifers are going to be used, according to Numbers 19, to dedicate, to consecrate Israel's holy place or central place of worship, which in this case is temple number 3. That's why there's this great interest in these red heifers. Now, the fact that this is even in the conversation today, and I'm not sure if these red heifers are going to work out or not. I'm not sure this is that, so to speak. But the fact that this is even in the conversation today, demonstrates that we're not on the minute hand or the hour hand anymore, but we're on the second hand. This is now becoming the focus of the world, the Temple Mount. I was on air Friday prior with Aaron Levarco of, I think his ministry is Light to the Nations Ministries, who is a Hebrew Christian on the ground in Israel, reporting from Israel. And he made the statement, and you can find this on the Brandon House Worldview Weekend radio show that I did with Brandon House and Aaron last Friday. And Aaron Levarco basically made an announcement that stunned all of us. He said, you know what, most people don't know it yet, but the Temple Mount is now on the table. The Trump administration has put the Temple Mount on the table in front of Netanyahu. And Levarco seemed very, very confident that it was just a matter of time before this deal becomes public and it's announced to the world that Israel has now been given sovereignty over the Temple Mount for the purpose of rebuilding her temple to be used as a benefit for all of the nations. Now, whether that report that Levarco gave is true or not is yet to be determined. But if it comes to pass, it's just more information related to the focus of the world moving to the last days temple. And that's very significant because it shows us the encroaching, imminent 70th week of Daniel, where the Antichrist will desecrate the third Jewish temple midway through the tribulation period. So keep your eyes on not just Israel, not just Jerusalem, but all of these discussions and conversations and discoveries and preserving archaeology, preserving timber, these kind of things related to the Temple Mount. We're truly living in messianic times. Let me take you to this third area, and this has to do with the coming GOG-MAGOG invasion. Here we have a map of the various nations, according to Ezekiel 38 and 39, that will invade Israel in the last days. We make reference to the fact that we are on the eve of this particular prophecy being fulfilled, as well as the stage is very aggressively being set for the identical Middle East scenario that God speaks of in His Word. There's two quick issues I want to deal with here in this session. You can find out more about these, because here I can only talk in an abbreviated way, but you can find out more about these in depth, get all the documentation in my little book, The Middle East Meltdown, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel. But the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the horses and horsemen that are mentioned in Ezekiel's prophecy. Notice Ezekiel 38 and verse 4. As Ezekiel is describing this end time invasion, he said, I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, speaking of the countries that will invade Israel in the last days, one of which is Russia. And I will bring you out and all your army, watch this now, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly attired, a great company with buckler, shield, all of them wielding swords. And people have, you would not believe the mockery that us futurists go through, because they try to say this is not a future battle, this is an ancient battle. After all, it talks about these ancient forms of warfare, horses and horsemen. I mean, nobody fights wars like that anymore. You guys, you futurists, are crazy by arguing that this is some kind of futuristic war. But there are some interpreters. Let me give you a couple names. The late Dr. John Walvoord, in his book, Nations in Prophecy, I don't have a screenshot of this, but it's on pages 115 to 116. He argues in that particular book, I think written back in the late 60s, early 70s, that horses means horses and horsemen mean horsemen. And some way, somehow, that form of warfare must return in order for this prophecy to be fulfilled. Another interpreter that I have a very high opinion of that goes down this same route is Paul Lee Tan. I went through graduate school, my PhD time at Dallas Seminary with his daughter, Christine Tan. Paul Lee Tan is now with the Lord, but he wrote a classic book. If you don't have this, you should get this and read it from cover to cover. It's called Interpretation of Prophecy. And here's what he says about the horses and horsemen, Ezekiel 38, verse 4, on pages 223 to 224 of his book. He says, quote, interestingly, and keep in mind he wrote this as part of his doctoral dissertation at Grace Seminary, if I remember right, in Winona Lake area, Indiana. And this would go back to probably the 1970s. And this is what he said about the horses and horsemen of Ezekiel 38, verse 4. Interestingly, these prophesied military instruments, though centuries old, have not been made obsolete. The horse, for instance, is still used in warfare on certain kinds of terrain. Most people are shocked to discover that our own CIA, in one of the war's early 1980s battles in the Middle East, actually brought in horses from Tennessee because to navigate one of the situations there in Israel, in the Middle East, because only a horse is capable of conducting warfare in that mountainous terrain. You know, a man-made tank or something of that nature can't help you in that kind of terrain conduct warfare, but a horse can. So what I'm saying is, there's a lot of people that said, you know what, horses and horsemen, that's what it means. And I believe what God says. And of course, such people are perpetually ridiculed. How could you say such a ridiculous thing? We're not going back to horses and horsemen to fight these battles. Therefore, Ezekiel 38 and 39 is something that happened in ancient history. It's not a prophetic description of a futuristic conflict. But what you'll discover is if you take God at His word and don't rewrite the Bible. I mean, if there's a figure of speech, you take it figuratively, but there it'll be conspicuous or obvious. It's not a figure of speech. Take God at His word, because God can't lie. Hebrews 6 verse 18 says it's impossible for God to lie. Eventually, ultimately, the literalist will be vindicated. And that's why I found these two articles from Newsweek very, very interesting. The first one, dated February 10th, 2025, says Russia Keep in mind, Russia is one of the invaders in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 scenario, appears to deploy troops on horseback in the Ukraine. Opening sentence from the article, it says, Russia appears to have begun to deploy its troops on horseback in Ukraine as reports emerge that Putin has nearly depleted his Soviet military stockpiles. It says videos are circulating on Russian Telegram channels that appear to show Russian soldiers mounted on horses. Reports that Russia's military is using horses in the war suggest that Putin is resorting to extreme measures due to equipment shortages caused by his full-scale invasion of Ukraine launched in 2022. It's a lengthy article, but it gives you a lot of the details. It quotes a Russian leader who justified the measures by saying it was a normal practice during World War II to use horses and dogs to transport equipment. So I guess a literal interpretation of Ezekiel 38 and verse 4 is not that ridiculous, is it? Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they're currently using horses. And so exactly what God said concerning the Russian invasion of Israel is not a ridiculous scenario. It's now a very credible scenario. Here's a second article from Newsweek I'll draw your attention to. This one even more recent, February 27th, 2025. It says Russia deploys donkeys and camels in Ukraine amid resupply struggles. Russian forces have deployed donkeys and camels in Ukraine amid resupply struggles to equip troops at the front line with necessary goods, according to reports. The Russian army has been using camels for transport, as the Telegram channel Crimean Wind posted a photo of a Russian soldier riding a camel. Russia's reported use of camels in the military is not new, as the Soviet army used them as a means of transporting during World War II. Horses have recently been used to deploy troops in Ukraine, and there have been several videos of Russian soldiers on horses circulating on Russian Telegram channels. With that issue being broached, let me take you to another real fast issue related to the GOG-MAGOG scenario, and it has to deal with Ezekiel 38 and verse 13. Let me read that to you very quickly. It says, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, or Tarshish, with all of its villages will say, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled company to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, and to take away cattle and goods, and to capture great spoil? Sheba and Dedan, which we believe is modern-day Saudi Arabia, when this invasion happens, yet future, apparently on horseback, as we discussed earlier, Sheba and Dedan, or Saudi Arabia, is the only nation to speak up and defend Israel. It's a lame protest, as many have called it. They complain against the invasion coming against Israel from Russia, Iran, Turkey, etc., but they don't do anything to stop it. And so we have to at some point ask the question, where is the United States in this? Why doesn't the United States step in, say something, protest, do something to stop the invasion, because the United States is a long-standing ally with Israel? That is a question that has plagued Bible prophecy students and commentators for a very long time. Could it be, and I'm just offering this as a potential answer to that question I raised a moment ago, could it be that the United States of America has been Islamicized by the time this invasion transpires? Or could it be that the Islamic population in the United States of America is so large, so influential, so vociferous that it influences the policies of the United States of America in more of an anti-Israel direction. I would suggest that that kind of thing is happening right now. I want to share with you a couple of articles from Rare Foundation. This one by Amy Meck, M-E-K, if I'm pronouncing her name right. In fact, she wrote both of them. This one dated March the 1st, 2025. And she's talking in these articles about how Muslims are just carte blanche taking over United States cities. This particular article says the Islamic Center of, now here's the name of a town, which is hard to pronounce because the P is silent, and I think you pronounce that Pflugerville. The Islamic Center of Pflugerville, Mohammed Mohamadi Masjid is not just expanding, it's planting the flag of Islamic dominance in Texas. Their own leadership admits it. They have a packed agenda to grow their Muslim community, educate children in full-time Islamic schools, and create a self-sufficient enclave which holds views which are an anathema to American values. Now, we already reported on this in a prior pastor's point of view regarding the city, Sharia-compliant Muslim schools that Yasser Qadi is now building outside of Dallas, I believe in Plano, Texas. Well, here's the example of another one now emerging in Texas. The article says, now ask yourself, where are the American Christian megachurches being built in Islamicized Pakistan? They don't exist. They wouldn't be allowed. Meanwhile, in Texas, Islam is thriving, expanded, and fully funded. The leadership of this particular town has a packed agenda. What is it? The mosque leadership openly admits to having a packed agenda for expanding the Muslim community in Austin, particularly Pflugerville. They emphasize that the Muslim population has grown exponentially in the last 4 or 5 years, raising questions. What is fueling this rapid expansion? Who is coordinating it? They explicitly state that this area is becoming a Muslim hub, attracting families from both the east and the west coasts, suggesting deliberate migration patterns. They are pushing for a full-time Islamic school completely separate from American education, ensuring that Muslim children are raised primarily in Islamic doctrine and shielded from Western values. The massive expansion project includes an 8,000 square foot, 2-story addition, a full-time Islamic school, and even plans for a soccer field to keep the children in the Islamic ecosystem. Mosques across America receive foreign funding from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Gulf states, funneled under the guise of community building, yet the ultimate goal is clear: the expansion of Islam through migration. This isn't just a mosque, it's a separate Islamic society forming within Texas, complete with its own educational system, sports culture, religious life, social culture, and Sharia practices. The goal is to ensure that future generations remain loyal to Islam over American cultures. Now, the author does a great job saying Muslims have done this in other places throughout the world. She says, look at the Western cities already lost. Birmingham in the UK, once a British city, now dominated by Islam with Sharia courts in operation. Paris, France, with its no-go zones, Islamic riots, and demands for Islamic-only laws. Stockholm, Sweden, entire districts under Islamic control with the police afraid to enter. Here's how the article concludes. Texas is next on the list. Unless Americans wake up, will the West surrender? The reality is stark but simple. The most tolerant culture always submits to the least tolerant. The question is how much longer before Texas bends the knee. If this weren't bad enough, there's a second article written by the same author about a week later, March 8th, 2025, also published by rarefoundation.com. And this is dealing with a city now, not in Texas, but in New Jersey. Paterson, New Jersey. It says New Jersey's first Islamic city. And here's a few things that are happening there. A shocking transformation is unfolding in Paterson, New Jersey, where officials are rapidly reshaping the city into an Islamic stronghold. Once a beacon of American industry and blue-collar resilience, Paterson has become a case study in how unchecked Islamic immigration, demographic shifts, and political pandering can erode a city's original identity. Muslim elected leaders with deep ties to radical Islamic organizations are prioritizing identity over American values and steering Paterson away from its historical roots. Every policy change, symbolic gesture, and political appointment moves the city to becoming an Islamic enclave. The article talks about an awful lot of things. Flags are changing. Officially, they renamed a main street in 2022. They named it to Palestinian Way. The event's oversized crescent moon, publicly displayed for 30 days, is not about Ramadan. It's a symbol of Islamic political dominance in America. It goes on and it talks about this influential Islamic center of Passaic County, a mosque known for its radical sermons. This particular imam in this particular mosque in Paterson, New Jersey, has called Christians idolaters and spoken about Muslims overtaking disbelievers. So much information here, I can't give it all to you in this setting, but I would really encourage you to download this article and to read about it yourself. Things that the mayor is doing. The mayor said Paterson is the fourth holiest city in the world to Islam, next to Jerusalem, Mecca, Medina, and then Paterson, he says. Food, grocery, diet, all of those things, are changing in Paterson, New Jersey to accommodate this new Islamic takeover. The city is being radicalized. My goodness, in 2022, a councilman, the city's first Palestinian American council member, successfully pushed to rename Main Street to Palestinian Way or Palestine Way. A symbolic declaration of allegiance to a foreign entity. The renaming was deliberately timed for May the 15th, the so-called Nakba Day, a propaganda effort designed to delegitimize Israel's right to exist. The Nakba narrative falsely portrays Israel as an aggressor, ignoring the historical reality that Arab leaders rejected peace and launched a war of annihilation against Israel in 1948. The city is promoting all of these Islamic events. The city now boasts that Muslim officials like Serene Tameh, if I'm pronouncing that right, Patterson's first hijab-wearing Palestinian-American police officer. And the article basically concludes by Americans need to wake up, and they need to wake up fast, because what is happening is the city is being Islamicized. Let me just read you this conclusion. This is not about religious freedom. This is a calculated effort to Islamicize American towns, one street and one elected position at a time. The Hilal lighting ceremony is just another step towards ensuring that Islam is not just accepted, but becomes the dominant cultural and political force. Patterson is warning every American town and city. The question is no longer if this will happen elsewhere, it's where will it happen next? How many more communities must fall before we acknowledge the pattern? If this can happen in Patterson, it can happen anywhere. So I hope folks out there listening are in the ear of their elected representatives saying, we don't like this, and we don't want this pattern to continue. I think we had the screenshot up a little earlier. This is a police officer in Patterson wearing the Palestinian flag. The screenshot from X says Islamification. Patterson, New Jersey is being called Little Palestine by its own mayor. The police wear Palestinian flags instead of the American flag. And so there's a screenshot where you can see that happening. Is that the reason why America is not mentioned as coming to Israel's defense in the forthcoming infamous GOG-MAGOG invasion? Have America's policies towards Israel changed because of the Islamic growth and population and takeover of the United States? I think that's a very sad but a very interesting prophetic development to report on. And as this takeover is happening with Yasser Qadi near Plano, Texas, Patterson, New Jersey, and then also Pflugerville, Texas, I want to close here with the words of Teddy Roosevelt. Keep in mind that Teddy Roosevelt is really considered in his day more of a progressive president. But notice these words of wisdom that he gives here. Quote, in the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on an exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin. But this is predicated upon the person's becoming in every facet an American and nothing but an American. There can be no divided allegiance here. Any man who says he is an American but something else also isn't American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. And we have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people. Folks, if we don't wake up and get back to Teddy Roosevelt's sound immigration logic, we're going to find ourselves very quickly living in a different country. And if we do, maybe that's part of the prophetic scenario. Maybe that's why America does not come to Israel's defense in the events of the coming GOG-MAGOG invasion. As for me and my house, we're going to do everything within our abilities to stop this Islamic takeover of America from occurring. We're going to be in the ear of our city, state, local, federal and national elected representatives, and we're going to be explaining to them that these trends happening here in isolated areas, we don't like them. We think it goes against what our country stands for. We think actually they're illegal and unconstitutional, and we want you to do something to slow down the decay. So this is a pretty heavy prophecy update. We dealt with the restrainer, looking at our review slide, some things related to temple number 3, and some things related to the coming GOG-MAGOG invasion, specifically dealing with horses in Russia, used for military purposes, and specifically dealing with an explanation as to why the United States is not mentioned as coming to Israel's defense, potentially perhaps because she has been Islamicized. We're going to come back to you next time with some even more cutting edge topics. Thank you for watching Pastor's Point of View. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.